Thank you for joining me. I hope you've had a great day so far. Let me start by introducing myself a little bit. I feel a little bit out of place today because usually when I do talks, I give talks in the .NET world, and well, it's not a .NET conference. So who am I? I'm Hannes. I'm the father of 3 beautiful children, and I got engaged to the mother of said children, so it's not like I got divorced and got somebody else. I am the lead coach for .NET at a company called Access. We are about 300 people in Belgium, and 15 in the Netherlands since a year or 2. And I've been writing .NET backend code since 2005. And the thing I love doing most is standing in front of people and sharing things that I learned. And that makes this story, for me, super personal. Because this story, although the title has artificial and intelligence in it, is not about AI. It's about one of the things I love doing most, and that's building people. There are some other fun facts about me that you can see me in the hallway about. I'm a line breaker. We have the world's foremost IT-themed rock and pop parody cover band. If you add enough adjectives, you can always reduce the sample set to 1, right? That's us. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, which is kind of like Java champion, but on the other side, and an in-service bus champion. Now, relevant to this story, and I swear that this is relevant, I started working at Access 13 years ago. As a .NET consultant. And because I love knowledge sharing and because I love working with people, I made coach a year later. What a coach does at Access will become clear later in the story. And I made principal consultant in 2018. And that basically means that you are now involved in the sales and in pre-sales tracks at the company. So it's not really that much of a promotion. I'm also head of learning and development. And as you can see, I kept doing all of those roles until pretty recently. And now I had to kind of choose in my career what I really wanted to focus on. Turns out it's going to be this. So when I was thinking about how I was going to tell this story, I was struggling. And I was figuring out how am I going to tell 13 years of coaching people and doing knowledge sharing. And I figured I could use one of my favorite movies of all time, because I must have seen Pulp Fiction at least 15 times. And it's not just a great source of memes, this movie, because we all know all of the Pulp Fiction memes. But one of the things that makes Pulp Fiction special, in my opinion, it's a Tarantino movie. So it means that they make use of non-linear storytelling. The order in which the story is told is not necessarily the order in which the story happened, right? And that is exactly what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take a few storylines throughout the last 13 years and tell you about things we experimented with, things we stole from other companies, things that we tried and failed, and things that we tried and succeeded. Does that sound good? Usually there's a bit of a response, but okay. I get it, you don't like the .NET guy, that's fine. So let's start with knowledge sharing. And knowledge sharing is one of the first reasons that I started working for Access. I was tired of my previous employer. I wanted a place where I could really grow. And one of the reasons that I signed up with the company was they had a thing called competence centers. And competence centers, in the beginning, was just a knowledge-sharing evening where the company would buy the pizza and the beer, and somebody, 1 or 2 people, would come and tell a story about stuff that they worked with or that they had investigated or whatever, shared it with the group. We usually spent an entire evening from 6 to 9. The content was a little over half of that. The rest of it was just chatting over a beer and eating some pizza. We do have healthier food options in the meanwhile. But the primary goal for us at the time was, well, if somebody researches it and shares it with the others, all the other people grow. And that's great. But we started noticing so many beneficial side effects. Because if you research a story and you try to put it into something you can tell others, your understanding of the subject also grows, and you as a person also grow if you tell the story. We also noticed that people who presented certain topics started gaining recognition from their colleagues. And they got us a kind of reputation inside the company for being the expert on said topic, which is a great thing to have as well for them. And since we're a consulting firm, most of our people work at the customer. So bringing everybody together at the company also made sure that they connected with each other, they connected with the company, and we started seeing all these nice benefits. And one of the cool things about this is it all happened after hours. So knowledge sharing in this way is super cheap to organize as a company, right? Because you don't take away from customers' time and people learn after hours. Great, right? Well, not always. But we had to get the ball rolling, and getting people motivated to actually give those talks was pretty hard. So we set out with a group of people and we decided, okay, we're going to set a great example ourselves, and we're going to give a few of these talks, and then we're going to motivate the usual suspects to also give some talks. And we also noticed that this needs to be one of the measures that we talk about in an end-of-year review. Because at some point you want to reward people for putting in effort. Investing effort into the group should be rewarded equally as investing effort into what happens at the customer, right? So this needed to be a topic that we would use in our end-of-year reviews. It also needed to be a topic that we would use in people's targets, because as soon as the ball was rolling, we needed more people to start giving these talks. So we would put it in people's targets, and that way we got everything to get going. And at some point, we got the whole system up to speed. And it started happening spontaneously. And as a coach, that was fantastic, because my role became facilitation. It became finding a date where it doesn't collide with too much other stuff. Other knowledge sharing sessions in other groups, maybe the quarterly meeting at the company, all that sort of stuff. We need to kind of find out where we would align these sessions. And we had so many of them that became the only thing we needed to do. We didn't need to motivate people to give more talks. So that's great. But when we looked at this from a distance, we started seeing a couple of other things that were maybe not so great. We started seeing that some of the group were always the same people showing up. And that's super good. And then we had a bunch of people that showed up from time to time. We had some people that never showed up. And you could always argue, like, hey, if you want to do something like this after hours, there's always going to be a part of the group that you're not going to reach. Maybe it's not possible to reach them. But at least we wondered, like, what's going on here? And we started talking to these people, and we started to figure out what was going on. And it is really stupid stuff, like, hey, you always do this on a Tuesday, but I have sports practice on a Tuesday. You always do this after hours, but in the evening, I take care of my children, of my family, so I can be there, right? Or I work at a customer in the east of Belgium, and you're always organizing this in Antwerp. That's going to make it very hard for me to be there as well. And that led to a whole bunch of insights. It's like, okay, there are some people who are never going to be there because they don't want to be there. But there are some people who want to be there, but we're making it hard for them to attend. So in the meanwhile, we have started experimenting by changing the date, changing the location where we're doing this, also changing the time of day. We're doing lunch sessions now as well, try and doing some stuff during hours as well. And we have a recording set up at the company to record some of the sessions so that people can watch them delayed or can watch them remotely. And I'm not going to say that we've got it all figured out, but by experimenting with this, we've actually managed to remove some of the blocking factors and get more people involved, and I think that's a great thing. Now, we got our train moving, and a lot of these sessions were happening, and we had more sessions than we could actually plan without colliding. And at some point, we had an idea, how about we do a huge knowledge-sharing day? And that's the moment that we had an internal conference. And really think JFall, right? One conference day, 5 tracks, all our people giving talks for our people on a single day during work hours, right? Nobody has to take a day of holiday to be here. Just do it during the day, and in the evening you have a huge party. Make sure that everybody has a hotel so they don't have to drive home, and make the evening part optional, obviously. But the day part is very much like a day where everybody shares their knowledge. And I think that was fantastic, because this was knowledge sharing where it also became frictionless to attend sessions from one of the other departments in the company, where everybody came together to make this happen. Because if you look at this, there is about 40 speakers on this agenda. At this point, our company was about 200 people. That means 1 in 5 people was on stage that day. That takes tremendous effort in motivating people, giving them speaker training, helping them prepare their talks, and so on. But it also gives you the feeling of everybody coming together, because everybody's either excited about a talk they're giving themselves, or a talk their colleague is giving, or something that they really want to watch. And the disadvantages of doing this is this started eating into our evening knowledge sharing. But it brought it all to a day where everybody could attend. So it's really weigh your advantages against your disadvantages. And one of the things we noticed is that some of our colleagues liked the small setting of a knowledge sharing evening, but didn't like the whole company gathering in the whole crowd thing. And for them, it was too busy. So after the sessions were over, they would head home to decompress after a very busy day. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns here. And we had all this going, and then we had COVID. And we noticed a whole bunch of things happening to our knowledge sharing culture. First of all, people were able to still do knowledge sharing, but it would happen remotely on Teams or Zoom. But all of us were working on Teams or Zoom all day long, so we didn't really feel like doing more of that. So a lot of these sessions kind of died down. We also noticed that as soon as we were able to go back to the office, a couple of crucial things had changed in the way that we work. People worked from home way more, meaning that if they had to be in Antwerp to attend a session, that would become a logistics problem. They didn't feel like leaving home just for the knowledge sharing, so they just stayed home. We also noticed that people put way more value on their work-life balance, which is totally fine, which meant that we had to start experimenting with our 4 months a little bit more and do more things during hours so it didn't affect their free time as much. There's always going to be a balance somewhere in this story, but I think we got a lot of it figured out in the way that we just have to lower our own expectations a little bit. Because what I would want is whenever we organize that everybody is there. And that's just not going to happen anymore. The company has grown, our teams have evolved, our work-life balance has evolved, and we're going to just have to do things differently than we did before. So we're trying to slowly rebuild that culture, and it's still ongoing. But if we lower our expectations and we just take it one step at a time, we see that we can still get a lot of people involved with things like open spaces, knowledge sharing sessions, and so on. Also, one of the things that we noticed in this rebuilding phase is that when we reach out to people to give a talk, they are usually people in our company who already have a lot of other responsibilities. People who are taking up lead dev roles at their customer, people who are taking up coaching roles inside the company, who are maybe responsible for some internal applications that we build, and so on and so on. And when you're asking them to speak, you just pile up on top of the list of things that they're already doing. And that stresses them out. So we had to become very aware of the fact that we were doing this and make sure that we didn't expect anybody to just say yes when we asked them to do a session. So the conclusion of this knowledge sharing storyline is if you want to start doing this, you lead by example and you experiment with your formats and the way that you offer it to people remotely or videos or whatever. make sure that you reward people's effort when they do put in the effort to actually do this, because otherwise they won't do it again. And be aware of who is attending and who's not attending and figure out why. Because there might be explanations that you can solve and things that you have to be aware of. And make sure that you don't stress your people too much. Right. For my second storyline, which is the bigger scheme of things and a little bit what I based my abstract for this talk on. If we look at how economy works in our tech world, if you take a developer's skills throughout their career, you will see that their skills usually grow as their career progresses. Very logical. Now, what we also notice, if you have rich companies, like big tech firms, they are willing to pay top dollar for the people who have already built a skill set. And they're raising salaries in that market segment. So if you are a very, very senior developer, if you go work for one of the big companies, you can earn hundreds of thousands of euros per year, right? You have to move to Silicon Valley, maybe. What we see is that other companies are priced out of the market and have to compete for the less experienced people. But these companies also want talented people, which means that they are left with the task of building the talent that they're able to hire, right? Because if you hire somebody less experienced, but you need somebody experienced, well, then you're gonna have to build that talent, which is fine, but it also takes a lot of investment. And the irony of this situation is that a lot of developers start their careers with these other companies where they build their skill set, and those companies invest in them, and then at some point, well, they monetize on the effort they put into their career. They switch to one of the richer companies, and they're priced out of the market for their former employers. The irony is that all these big tech companies can only hire the experienced people because the other companies are building the talent. And they're then priced out of the market because of that. So it's hard to keep experienced people on board. And all of this puts a general pressure on wages in our industry. Right? Now, how can we cope with this given? Because this is a mechanism we cannot change, right? We don't have the power to change this mechanism. Well, what we found out, and we've talked to a bunch of other companies in similar positions, is what you have to do is make sure that you train your people and you have to keep paying them fairly. So there's no cheat code, like hire them in the beginning of their career and you can have them cheap forever. You have to make sure that their salary grows along with their skill set. As soon as you don't do that, they leave. So make sure that their pay is fair, but most importantly is you have to give them perspective. You have to make sure that they know where their career is going. Because when people switch employers, is when they start comparing their future somewhere else with their presence right here in this company. And that is comparing apples to oranges. So you have to make sure that your people know where their career is going in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And that's a conversation you should be having with them regularly. And then if they have a perspective, they're comparing apples to apples, and it makes it a lot easier to talk about this future when they think about switching jobs. But as a company, you have to market yourself. You have to market yourself in a way that not only the outside world knows what the things are that you are great at, you have to make sure that your own people also know what you're great at, because those are your strengths. And how do you find out where the gaps are in that story? Well, that's measuring things. And I know that the next slide may get a laugh, because I know that this gets used as a marketing tool a lot, right? A lot of companies use this as marketing, like, look at us, we're great. Now, what some of these awards do is they give you a standardized question list. A standardized question list where you're able to compare your results with everybody else in the market. And that's super valuable, because then you can figure out where are the areas where we're doing really well, but where are the areas where we need to do better. And if you use this tool as such, you can get so much value out of it, because every year you can compare your scores and you can choose a couple of areas where you're going to invest effort to improve. And that's what we've done. And we've gradually climbed that ranking. But the place in the ranking isn't the important bit. It's the fact that we are able to measure where we are in the market. So there's a bunch of these tools out there. We are using Great Place to Work. But measuring satisfaction is a great way to figure that out. And adding custom questions is a great thing as well, because there's always a couple of dynamics inside a company that are very specific to the way that you operate. And if you add questions about that, then you can figure out where you stand. The only thing that you will not have there is the comparison with other companies. So, to make sure that people are not left wanting on the money side of things, if you're treating them well, you've got to make sure that you talk about salary on a regular basis. There should be a point in time, I would argue every year or every 6 months, where you sit down and you talk about compensation. It needs to be scheduled, it needs to be for everyone, and you need to go into that conversation very well prepared from both sides. Meaning, if you still need to figure out that person's performance during that talk, you're doing it wrong. That needs to be self-evident before you go into the talk. But you need to give them a place to bring up their expectations salary-wise, so that you can have that conversation on a regular basis, because otherwise they are going to look for it elsewhere, and then you're going to have a different conversation with them after that. So, what I want you to take away about the economic side of things is measure it, be aware of the market that you're in, and know what strategy you're playing. Because if you are a big, rich corporation, you can maybe not do any of this and just pay top dollar for your talent. It's a valid strategy, wouldn't make me happy, but at least it will work. And you have to be prepared to continuously improve. If you want to do this well, you're going to have to measure this and keep improving the way that you do this. All of this just boils down to treat your people well. Make sure that they feel appreciated for the things that they're doing, also on the compensation side. Now, intermediate storyline, Pulp Fiction also has this. We had a weekend situation. 2013, I had just made coach. And I went to my boss, and I said to my boss, hey, Benjamin, I want to take my team on a 2-day trip somewhere, and we're going to do 1 day of knowledge sharing. We're going to do 1 day of fun stuff, just team building, and I want to do that in the Belgian Ardennes. And he told me, Hannes, we are not the Boy Scouts. So what I learned there was not, well, if my boss doesn't agree, I shouldn't be doing this. No, I saw value in that idea. I wanted to do it, and I knew it was going to work. So I took Ton, our HR manager, and we made a better case. So we made a bit of a schedule of what we would do in those 2 days, how we could budget things, and so on. And we represented it to Benjamin. Now, side information, this was also the day that the year that we got control over training budgets, so basically I already had the authority to do this, but I still needed approval from Benjamin. And Benjamin said, well, I'm not going to be able to stop you. So that was as much blessing as we needed. We went, it was great. We did, this is earlier me up there somewhere. We did this, it was amazing. But the fun thing is, Benjamin took the effort to drive from Antwerp to the Ardennes, which is like 2 hours each way, to join us for the evening barbecue. And he arrived at the end of the knowledge sharing, he had dinner with us, and then he drove back home. And I don't condone of texting and driving, but from the car, he texted me and he said, Hannes, this was a great idea. I'm so happy you did this, and we should be doing this with all of our teams. And that's when I learned that it's sometimes better to just push for something and ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. Very important part of the story. So if you bring people together and you mix fun with learning, that is when you get fantastic results. We had great knowledge sharing in those 2 days. I also learned that a lot of my consultants are afraid of heights because we booked one of those adventure things where you climb a bunch of ropes and half of them didn't want to go up. So I know that I need to scout for better team building activities when we do these things. But don't be afraid to fight for things that you believe in, because you often end up triggering other people and getting a ball rolling for so many better things. And this is one of the things that I'm really proud of, training catalogs. Now, to affect growth in people's careers, you're going to need a bunch of different tools. Knowledge sharing sessions are not your only tool. You're going to need so much. You're going to want to be able to give people books, give them classroom training, run workshops, let them go to conferences like this one, offer them access to online platforms like O'Reilly, for instance, or Pluralsight. And if you want to accelerate all those things, you're going to need a budget to make that happen. Because all of these things cost money, even if it is in the terms of time that you miss from your customer, and all of it will cost you. So when we were given control over training budget as coaches, the first thing is we looked at some of our competitors, like how do they deal with all of this? And we saw like, okay, a lot of them allow people to spend their budget with certain training partners. They allow people to buy books, to buy online platforms, and so on. So we figured, okay, we have this budget for the group. How are we going to spend it efficiently? So we launched a big questionnaire where all of our consultants could answer us what they wanted. They could let us know what they wanted as training. And then we started allocating budget, like, okay, you take this training, you go there, you go to that conference, for you we buy this online platform. And we tried to spend every euro in the budget. And we noticed that some people didn't even want to fill out the questionnaire. And that's when we learned we got to push people to spend their training budget. Because some people need to be pushed. And it's okay, you can book something for them in hours where they still go and learn, but some people will not, from themselves, go and do this. So we had to help them find what's available out there, and we had to help them find the training that was suitable for this. And this took a lot of effort on our side to puzzle that budget together for the whole group, but we felt like we were maximizing the value. But then we had some negative experiences. We figured out that for some of the training companies out there, and apologies if you work for them, one of them, but some of the training companies out there, they give you a trainer who has studied the material as it is taught in the classroom, but doesn't have any production experience on the thing. So if you then have motivated people in that classroom and they ask questions, the answer is going to be, I don't know. And that led to some negative experiences with some of those companies. So we started planning some more efficient ways of doing this. We started finding trainers that we were more certain of and bringing them into our company to teach a whole group of people. Added benefit is that that is a lot cheaper than sending a bunch of people to an open roster training. So we were both optimizing for result and for budget at the time. Also, when we bring people together to go to a conference as a group, instead of sending people to conferences individually, and I'm looking at the second row there, which are basically almost all colleagues, if you go to a conference together, you experience it together. It's also kind of a team building, which has an added benefit as well. And we also balance between spending time during hours and sometimes a little bit after hours. We offer workshops that are 9 to 5. We also offer workshops that are 2 to 8. And the advantage of doing that is that for those people who want to really accelerate their careers and they are willing to invest a little bit of their free time, you can offer them more training for the same budget. It's never about saving on the budget. It's about doing more with the money that you have. And that's the exercise that we have always been doing. And if you allow them to spend a little bit of free time, you have people that will actually do that, and they will accelerate quicker because they're willing to invest some of that time. But what is important through all of this is that you keep asking your people what they want. You can't just build a catalog and then put people in certain training. You still have to give them a way to book their own stuff. And one of the things that came through all of this already a long time ago is that at some point we decided that books are going to be free. Because when do people read books? Well, on their free time. What's the price of your average textbook? Let's say 50 euros. If somebody spends an hour reading a part of that book, that's still basically the cheapest training you can give them. So as long as they don't buy the books by the pile, but they buy them one by one, we don't even deduct them from their training budget. We just have Amazon deliver the book to their house, and they can read it, and when they're done with it, they can either return it to the company's library or keep it at home. We don't really care. I think it's a very great thing to think about the stuff that would cause friction if you would have to spend time on it. I don't want to spend time on 50 euros. If you want to learn and you want the book, you're going to get the book. And we have evolved this whole system because we noticed that we are organizing a classroom full of people that want to learn one thing, and we are organizing a classroom full of people that learn the other thing, and then they learn about each other. It's like, hey, that training would have been interesting as well. Well, that's great, but you didn't ask for it in your survey, so that's why we put you in that classroom. Yeah, but maybe I could have also taken... So we wanted to visualize what we're organizing. And we built a tool. We call it the Flex Education Plan, very fancy name. A tool where people can see whatever gets organized in the company. So if you have a bunch of people going to a certain conference, you can see it in the tool. And we started virtualizing people's training budget as points in the tool, so they can just log in and choose whatever they want to do. So they can just go like, okay, I have 250 points, I can spend it, I can go to this conference, I can get that online learning platform, I can take these workshops. And until they run out of points, usually they don't really have to have a conversation whether it is worthwhile to do this. What we did notice is that a bunch of people are not spending their points, so it's not because you have a tool like this that you don't have to push people to spend their budget. You have to keep pushing people to spend their budget, because training is never where you want to save money. If you have unspent training budget, as a company, you are losing. Your people are not growing. Remember this, right? Push them to spend the budget. But we allow people to also make suggestions. Hey, I've seen this conference, it's not in the tool, but I think it's worth going to. And then one of our coaches can just decide, well, let's put it in the tool so others can go with you, right? Or I've seen this training, maybe that's worthwhile. And then you put that in there as well. And we do follow up with two kinds of people. The people who are not spending their budget at all. And if we see people making very questionable choices, that's also a place where somebody will have a conversation with them like, hey, I saw you click these things together. Are you maybe not finding what you actually need? It's worth a conversation. But effectively, it's very important for us for people to be in control themselves, because they choose their own career path. Because as soon as you try to push them in a different direction is, again, when they will leave. Now, throughout all of this, we have started tapping into a huge amount of potential. We noticed that we have so much knowledge in the heads of our own people. We have so many things that we can learn from our own colleagues. And by enabling them to teach their colleagues, you will maybe get trainers that don't have the presentation skills of somebody who does this professionally. But you usually do get people who have production experience on the thing, which is worth a lot. And presentation skills is something you can teach. Also, as soon as you have shaped certain content and tried it out internally, you can actually monetize that and sell that to customers. Hey, you need somebody to run a workshop on event sourcing? Well, we're going to send Hannes and he's going to teach you for 2 days. So it's all efforts that you're spending on things that can be used multiple times. And we noticed that using internal trainers in general, is cheaper than getting the same expertise from the outside, which again allows us to offer more training for the same budget. It's never about offering the same amount of training cheaper. But because we have some budget left over, we can actually hire industry experts to come and teach us. Because we can never get all of the knowledge that we want from our own people. There's always new stuff happening in the market that we need to internalize. So we're going to need somebody to come over to teach us. And then we can just hire the person who maybe built the thing or the person who is evangelizing the thing. And we can get them to come over. And it's always very expensive to get those people. But because you're organizing it internally, you have the opportunity to fill the whole classroom. Maybe 10 people are interested, and 5 more don't have the points but would want to come. It makes sense to get those 5 people in the room, even if that forces them to go over budget that year. Because what will happen is that you're making the best use of the money you're spending on the trainer. And going over budget is a discussion. I mean, I think Matthias, who is one of our coaches who is sitting right there, can attest to this. It's a conversation that we regularly have with people. Because we have this conversation often. It's like, hey, I want to take this extra training. It'll put me in the minus. How do we do that? And there's a couple of solutions to that. Spend some of your recuperation time on one of the trainings, or give something back to the group, give a knowledge sharing session about one of the things. Like, there's many different ways that you can make sure that that person doesn't feel like they're missing something, and that as a company you still benefit from the whole thing. It's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not in order for us to win, they have to lose, or for them to win, we have to lose. We can both win in this whole story. And that's very important to realize. But this actually, the fact that we are using these external trainers to bring in new knowledge makes sure that we as a group keep growing, and after a few times we can internalize it and then run our own workshops about stuff. And that's one of the things that we do super well with people at the start of their careers, because what we notice is if we hire people fresh out of college or out of university, they're lost, they're puzzled, and they need to find their ways towards a customer. If you hire young graduates, you're going to have to deal with that skill gap. And almost all of the skills that those people need are present inside your company. They're present inside your more experienced consultants. So we started doing this with a bunch of external trainers. And I'm talking, in the beginning I was working for Access, was when we had the first boot camps 13 years ago. And we hired a whole bunch of external trainers to teach the stuff that we thought was necessary. Over time, we have evolved to teaching almost all of it ourselves. And this has 2 super cool benefits. A, it has reduced the cost of our boot camps a lot. B, it has created a bond between our new recruits and the more senior people in the company. They get the benefit of knowing, well, when I talk about Java Spring, I'm going to talk to Matthias. And when I talk about Agile, I'm going to talk to somebody else. And they know who to get their hooks out to when they're lost at their first customer. And that's super valuable. So you can start doing this by hiring people, but if you can evolve to do it yourself, that's great too. And then there's a case that I want to make here today. It's this thing that we call soft skills. Soft skills have to be a part of this whole equation. And I hate the name soft skills, because soft skills are not soft at all. If you don't have communication skills, if you don't have presentation skills, that can break a career. And for tech people, it's not in their nature to pursue those skills. And you will see that some people get actually blocked in advancing their career because they're missing these core skills. And that's why I've started calling them core skills instead of soft skills. Now, there's 2 things that need to happen with these skills. First of all, when you notice that they're absent, that is something that you need to remedy. And our argument is that that should not come out of people's training budget. That is something that we should actually be doing for everybody that's struggling with this, because it's so important for all of the rest. There's also people who advance more throughout their career into more senior roles, where they start getting responsibility over their junior colleagues, where they have to give presentations to management and so on, and they need coaching skills, they need presentation skills. They need to be able to think about certain models when they're portraying their messages to others. And that is something that you have to help them achieve when they get to that point in their career. And we offer these skills completely separately from all of the other tech training because we think this is so important. But it's not. This will actually break people's career if it's not there. So even from our boot camp, we take a bunch of these skills into what people need to learn and grow about. So the takeaways when you're doing training budgets is you have to make sure that you have a varied offering and that you get people's input about what you're doing, but also give them control over where they're spending their budget. Make sure that you spend your money on the stuff that is worth spending money on. If you can save money in one place, you can spend it on something more expensive or better in another. And it should never be about saving money. You should always strive to offer more with the same budget. If you unlock your internal knowledge, you can basically win a lot and spend that money in other places or offer more training. And don't forget, you've got to push people to spend their budget, right? If you say it 3 times, people remember. And that's where the whole role, because you've heard me mention the name coach or the role coach a whole bunch of times. And a coach for us is somebody who takes responsibility over other people's careers. And a coach, well, what do we see when you have all of these things in place? You're doing knowledge sharing, you have a training catalog, they're allowed to buy books, they can go to conferences, whatever. For some people, it's a straight line. They know what to do, they get going, they kick off, and they basically build an amazing career for themselves. For some people, they're a bit lost, and they try a little bit of everything until they figure out what works for them. And at some point, they figure out their direction, and then they get going. And that's fine, too. And for some people, they're just blocked by the overload of what you're offering them, and they don't know what to do. None of these is better than the other, right? One of these advances more than the other, but none of these are better. What we figured out is that people sometimes need help, and that's okay. And even that person on the top will benefit a lot from having somebody to have a conversation with about what to do next. And that's basically the responsibility of our coach. And what we want our coach to do is to give people guidance in their career. And we help them find their own path. We don't tell them what to do, but we help them find where they want to go. And we give them advice on which training might be for them and which might not be as beneficial. We help them set their goals. And this is very important. We are not setting their goals for them. We help them set their goals for themselves. Because if you set goals for somebody else, it's just an empty thing. If they say for themselves, the next year, I want to do this, and you help them, you support them to achieve that, but you also hold them to this, then it becomes something meaningful. And that's what our coaches do. So these are not managers. These are not people who are hierarchically above somebody else. These are people in support of their colleagues' career. And the coach should be the first person they talk to and who can unblock people when they are lost inside the organization. It should be their first point of contact for literally anything. So what kind of people do you need for that? Well, ideally, somebody who knows what the job is about, somebody with a technical background. But you could have the best technical background without great interpersonal skills. This will never work. And it has to be somebody who is driven and motivated by seeing others grow. If you don't care about the people around you, well, you might be the best technical person, but you're never going to make a great coach. You have to be somebody who wants to contribute to whatever happens around you. And if you can identify these people in your organization and give them time to actually develop that skill and spend time on their colleagues, you will see that you will be able to bill that person a lot less to your customers, but your whole group will elevate and grow. It's a very, very important role throughout all of this, because this is also the person who makes them spend their budget, right? Now, these are people who operate ideally from within the team, because if you're with the others doing the same thing, that gives them a lot of credibility in the job that people do. So, if you get coaches that can unblock people's growth in a facilitating role, I think that is something that will elevate any organization. It doesn't really matter where you are on the journey of building your learning catalogs or your knowledge sharing or whatever. Having somebody who holds up that mirror, it's super valuable. And the thing I had to learn most when I first made it into that role is being willing to set my own ego aside. If I had prepared a conversation with somebody and they show up and you can sense that they're not feeling well or something is the matter, and you ask them what's going on, and like their dog just died or they're having trouble at home or whatever, you have to be willing to throw your whole preparation in the bin and just have a conversation. In the beginning as a coach, I found that really hard, but I know now that that conversation matters more than anything else you will do. So, when we're lost, like Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction, where do we start through all of this? Well, it doesn't really matter where you start. You can start anywhere. You can take anything from this presentation and say, hey, that sounds like a fun thing that I want to try, and do that. But what you have to remember is that none of this you can pretend to do. You cannot pretend to care about people. The world doesn't work like that. So if you have to do this, if you want to do this, you're going to have to be real about it. And it requires many, many people and a lot of time to build all of this. It took us more than a decade to get to the point where we are, and we still have a lot of work to do and stuff that we want to experiment with. But because this is change, it always goes slowly, and it's one of the things that I had to learn a lot. When I was writing code, I could run the code and get almost instantaneous feedback on what I've done. With people, your feedback loop is months at best, years realistically. And that's, if you come from a tech background, that's something you need to get used to. You have to trust that you're doing the right thing and only see the results probably 2 years down the line. But the rewards of doing this is that you see people grow a lot, and you see people remain motivated, and you see people stay in your organization for a long time. And one of the coolest things for me is I now in the .NET League at Access, I have 6 team captains who do most of the day-to-day coaching. And 5 of those we hired in a bootcamp at some point, and they have grown into senior people. And they have grown into a place where they are taking responsibility into the organization and doing the same for their colleagues. And that's my circle of life moment. This is where I pass on the torch and I see other people take it over from where I left off. And you can start small. You can do one thing at a time. You can involve others. And don't get too nervous. A lot of these things take a lot of time. But you also don't need permission. Some of these things you can do without having an approved budget. Doing a lunchtime learning session requires no manager's approval. You can just do that, right? It's all about talking to your peers and figuring out what you want to do to help get this ball rolling. And at that point, you realize that your job has changed. You're no longer working in tech. You're no longer a programmer. You work in HR. But HR, not human resources. I hate the term resources because they're people, they're colleagues, they have names. They're called Matthias or Adele or somebody who you work with and who has a life of their own. So call it human relations, then it's still HR. And as Jules realized in Pulp Fiction, it's like, hey, I think my whole life has changed. I'm no longer this gangster. I'm doing something else now. You have realized that your company around you has changed and that you're doing something completely different. So, if all of this sounds inspiring to you, don't give up. It's very long. The feedback loop is long, and you will do things that fail. But as long as you're open to your colleagues about what you're trying, and as long as you're authentic about the things that you're doing, people will give you a lot more credit than you originally think. And that basically brings me to the end of my story. And this is the end of Pulp Fiction. But I have a question for the Pulp Fiction fans. If we put the entire movie in chronological order the way it happened, what would the last line of the movie be? Nobody? Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please rate this talk in the JFall app. If some of this sounds inspiring, I will be at the Access booth after this, so you can come and talk to me and ask some questions. I hope you have a great last session of JFall. Adele's going to be presenting in this room about how it's not always a great idea to rebuild stuff, right? But sometimes it is. But sometimes it is. It depends. It depends. Thank you so much.